Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you. My name is Dustin Cormier, and welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today is one of the first episodes that I'm going to do on my new channel. I've decided to do an episode talking about the Astrology of Jim Morrison. There's the man himself. And we can see there's a Western chart in the background. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to show the Western chart just so Westerners can get the idea of where we're at and what this chart looks like. But essentially, we're going to be talking about his chart through the eye of the Veda, through the guise of what I call neo-vedic or tropical Vedic astrology. I'd like to say I do not use a sidereal Ayanamsha, nor do I use Lahiri Ayanamsha to define the signs or the Rashis. In tropical Vedic astrology, we go by the philosophy of the Veda in interpreting a chart, but we use tropical measurements in the same way that Westerners use tropical measurements to define the chart. So you might have seen Jim Morrison's chart like this from the source I get it is astrotheme.com, and it's the same source. The same chart is used in the Kala data bank for those who use Kala. Kala is the software program created by Ernst Wilhelm, who is Ryan Kurczak's teacher and mentor. So, thank you so much for coming today, folks. I'm excited to show you this. Now, in particular today, I'm going to be sharing basically what I've given is a chart, an essay on Jim Morrison's chart from my year 2 in Ryan Kurczak's Astrology Apprenticeship program. Ryan Kurczak has a site that he calls ashevillevedicastrology.wordpress.com, and it's on this site. If I got me here, here we go. This is Ryan's site, ashevillevedicastrology.com, and in year 2, it's a 4-year course, and when I was in year 2, Ryan put my Jim Morrison's astrology essay on the site, which I'm very proud of, and so that's kind of why I'm sharing it today. If you want to see the full essay, go to ashevillevedicastrology.wordpress.com. This is the particular essay that I'm sharing with you guys. So that being said, let's keep in mind that this is a basic chart analysis that we're doing here. I'm trying to show Jim Morrison's astrology through the houses in particular. So we could consider this a class on bhavas, or houses for the Westerners. This is in particular, we're going to be talking about what Ryan Kurczak considers what we've been given from Parashara, Horashastra, regarding the prosperity and annihilation of a house, which we're going to be looking at here. And we get it from Parashara Horashastra, which is a sage from which so much of the Vedic knowledge of astrology comes from. Now, this is a look at Jim Morrison's actual chart, as given. It's a Southern style Vedic astrology chart, as we can see. We can see that his first lord, Saturn, is in Gemini with Mars. His his 6th lord, the moon, is in the 4th house in Taurus, a very, very well-placed moon. We're also going to talk about his Mars. The 4th house and the 5th house have a huge emphasis on Jim Morrison's life. And what I'm trying to describe is how basically the 10th house, the 4th house, and the 5th house of Jim Morrison relates very strongly. The 4th house, the 10th house, and the 1st house are the most prominently emphasized houses in Jim Morrison's chart from a very basic point of view. Now, I really want you to consider that there's much more to Jim Morrison's chart than I am expressing in this lesson today. We could say, for example, gosh, there's so much. This is only a year 2 analysis of this chart. So what we could talk about is, I don't talk about his Gemini planets. Jim Morrison's Atmakaraka was Jupiter. We don't talk about the nodes. We could see that Rahu is in his 7th house, right on the 7th cusp. And Ketu is right next to his ascendant. Ketu in Aquarius is a huge thing for Jim Morrison. We don't talk about Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune. This is a basic conception of trying to show how to define and configure the houses for any chart. And particularly talking about emphasized houses in Jim Morrison's chart. We're going to talk about how his moon in Taurus and the 4th house flavor is deeply emphasized in Jim Morrison's chart. We're going to talk about the 1st house emphasis and the 1st lord, Saturn, and Mars. Even though Mars is kind of behind the 5th house cusp, in Vedic astrology we talk about Gemini as being the 5th sign from Aquarius. And so the 5th house emphasis comes through very strongly for Mars and Saturn in this chart. So, without further ado, I just wanted you guys to consider the nature of this lesson and of the way I have framed my essay that you can check out on ashevillevedicastrology.wordpress.com. Whole lot of hoopla over introducing this video, and I feel like I should just get right to it. Now, just one last quick little look at the chart, just so you know what it is we're looking at once again. First thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 4th house, and I want to talk about, this is a list that Ryan, in his apprenticeship course, has given us through Parashara to define the prosperity or annihilation of a house, and the prominence of a house in a way. What makes a house prominent? Now we're going to talk about not only the planets inside of the house, benefics, malefics, evil house lords, but we're also going to emphasize very deeply on the house lord, the bhavesha, as we call it in Vedic astrology. So Westerners might not know, that the strength of a house is not just about the planets in it. We also have to talk about the lord of the house. We can see in Jim Morrison's chart that since he's in Aquarius, Taurus rules the 4th house. The 4th house cusp actually does fall in Taurus. So, wherever the ruler of Taurus is, and the health of that ruler, is going to greatly define the prosperity of the 4th house. Now for Jim Morrison, Venus, of course, is the ruler of Taurus, the 4th house, and Venus we can see is up here in the 10th house in Scorpio. Now there's lots of things to be said about that. Take note that we're not talking about Shadbala in this lesson, but Venus would be considered, it's in the 10th house, which is a good thing. There's always a lot of strength to the 10th house because the person has to deal with the planet. Any planet that's in the 10th house. 10th house is the top of the chart. It is really one of the most auspicious houses, typically. And we should say even, not necessarily auspicious, but definitely active. It is the most active house. So the fact that the 4th lord is in the 10th house really says a lot. I'm just going to check something here. Great. Really says a lot about the nature of this Venus. He had to learn how to use Venus. And we know that a lot about Jim Morrison as an artist, as a person who was very interested in his senses, in his fulfillment, in his sensual fulfillment. Now, when we are talking about predicting the prosperity of a house, this, for anybody who is wondering, this is the actual text given by Parashara. Now, I want to go do a quick little rundown of Ryan Kurczak's definition of the prosperity of a house. Again, we're going to be talking about the prosperity of the fourth lord, Venus, because we're in the fourth house in particular. All right. Now, prosperity of a house. Is the house conjunct or aspected by a benefic? This is the house itself. We can see that the moon here is considered a benefic because it is ahead of the sun and not past the full moon. So it's what we call a waxing moon. In Vedic astrology, when the moon is waxing, it's considered a benefic. The closer a waxing moon is to a full moon, the better. A full moon is when the moon is opposite the sun. So we can see that this moon is just behind the seventh from the sun. So it's considered a very benefic moon. So we would say that the fourth house does have a benefic in it. Is the house lord in an adult state, Yuva? Now what's that all about? When we go to our Parashara text, we see Parashara points out that when a house lord is in Yuva Avashta, that's adult state, it's the 12 to 18 degrees of a sign. Well, Venus is not in 12 to 18 degrees of its sign of Scorpio. So we know that Venus is not in a Yuva Avashta. It is not in a Kumara Avashta either. That is also, we can see, is the house lord in an adolescent state. Venus being in Scorpio, it's an even sign. So the even signs are considered the first 0 to 6 degrees of an even sign like Scorpio, it's considered Mrita Avashta. It's a dead Avashta. So that says a lot about Venus's capacity to learn how to manage its tasks as the fourth house lord. It's not a good sign. But that doesn't mean it's no good. It's just one of the many factors that we have to consider. What we're trying to do when we talk about all of these things that make up the strength of a house lord is we're trying to show how much more there is to astrology than most people tend to think. It's annoying and it seems like a lot, but it's better to know all of these things than not to. Now the house lord, Venus, the question is the house lord awake? And we could say that it is not awake. It's in Scorpio. It's in the sign of... Mars is neutral to Venus. But since Mars is so far away from Venus in this chart, we would consider it an enemy. So it's not terribly prosperous. So far, the only prosperous thing that we can say about the fourth house is that it is conjunct the benefic moon. Now the house lord is in the 10th house. Venus is in the 10th, and that does show prosperity. The house lord is not aspecting its own house in the Rashi aspects. Rashi aspects are something that you would just basically have to look up. It's its own style of aspect. Essentially, any planet in a fixed sign, like this Venus in Scorpio, aspects the cardinal houses surrounding it, except for the one beside it. Long story short, we can see that this Venus does not Rashi aspect the fourth house. Mercury and Jupiter Rashi aspecting the house. We can see that Jupiter is not Rashi aspecting Venus, but Mercury is. When any planet is in a cardinal sign, it will Rashi aspect all of the fixed signs except for the one directly adjacent to it. So Venus is getting some strength from Mercury. There's a lot of stuff here to consider, including especially the Rashi aspects. So if you'd like to look up Ryan Kurczak's astrology, you can see a little bit more about what that's about. But essentially, this is the kind of breakdown that we want to look at when we're talking about the strength of a house. So stay tuned for part 2. We are going to check out my essay We're going to combine all these themes of the prosperity of a house through the essay that I wrote on Jim Morrison and his most prominent houses.